Hello, I'm Somi and Arian. I'm the founder of the think tank for women in business and technology and the FemPeak platform, with the mission of raising women's socioeconomic status. I'm super excited to introduce you to our today's guest, Professor Diana Walsh Pasulka. I discovered Diana from Lex Fridman's podcast, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear a female professor of religion speak about the relationship between technology and religion. But most importantly, I realized that we both had a love of the German philosopher Nietzsche in common. Diana is also known for her work on UFOs, and her most recent book, The American Cosmic, shares a mind-bending series of experiences from some of the brightest individuals of our time who appear to be gaining their inspiration from unknown sources. So without further ado, let's dive right into the conversation with Professor Diana Walsh Pasulka.
And I can't believe you were in a death metal band.
Oh yeah.
That's unbelievable, but awesome. I love the music. It's great.
The funny thing is that, like, for example, on Instagram, most of the people who follow me are still people from the death metal era. They kind of don't get what is going on right now.
That's hilarious, right?
It's really
I think
funny.
That's great, yeah.
Especially the ones that were like from other countries or from Iran, so they don't understand what I post now. So
wow, that's
it's
great.
quite funny.
I love it personally.
Yeah, I think it's good to have, to be multifaceted and have like lots of different.
Definitely.
And I know that you're interested in that type of music, are you?
Yes. So, well, I like all kinds of music, but yes, I loved what you did, how you looked at it and everything. And I think it's really cool, everything that you do. Super interesting person. You are like Lex.
A few people had told me about his podcast. At the time, I was really listening to a lot of audiobooks, wasn't listening to podcasts that much. And then when I listened to it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This guy is interviewing everybody that I like, especially starting with like Max Tegmark. I went all the way to the beginning, and I had just read Max Tegmark's book. And I was like, oh, this is so cool, man. Like this guy interviewing all the people that I'm really interested. The interview with you was so interesting because it was like, I really like that he's not closed-minded and he brings people from so many different backgrounds. It's just so fascinating. Like people in academia, especially, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't finish my PhD, but the reason I didn't finish it was because I ran out of money. So I couldn't pay for the last year. And I was because I was an overseas student, so I couldn't get a loan or anything, and I just couldn't pay for that last year at that time. And actually, sometimes I think about going back to do it, but I'm building a business, and I think that my energy will be better used. I'm already running my marketing agency, and we're working with companies like Steinway Pianos is our biggest client.
I know. I think that's amazing. I saw what you do. Congratulations on your business. And the videos are beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, the work that we're doing with Steinway is so inspiring, and I think it's a real privilege, especially as somebody who has like a background in music, to be able to work with Steinway, which is like the best pianos in the world. So been working with them for about 4 years, and I have a number of other clients that we create content for, and the content is all about thought leadership or mini documentary style. So I run that, and then that pays for being able, I have a team of 6 people, and we are, that are helping me to build this think tank for women in business and technology and the FemPeak platform. That all costs money, and the money is coming from my first business. So I'm running these 2 businesses. One of them is a movement that I'm building, and one of them is and of course the movement has to have a business at its core, so that it can become sustainable, because it can't forever taking money from the other business, because the other business there's a limit to how much I can do that. Sometimes I think about going back to do a PhD. I actually saw something from Oxford University Future of Humanity Institute, and they have some scholarships now, and I'm like, oh, can I really do it? I'm already working 15 hours a day.
I think you could actually do it.
I think so too.
Do it.
Yeah. I think so too. But maybe not right now. I need to make sure that this business starts to pay for itself. I need to put things in motion so that my team, I need a big enough team. Like right now, everybody in the team is working at full speed. and then I'm working like as much as
Triple
three people.
speed. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So I have zero entertainment. I use this Aura ring to track my sleep, to make sure that I get enough sleep. I'm a bit of a data kind of sucker. So I just write down everything and make sure that I know where I am, like in my cycle, making sure that, you know, the mental well-being is taken care of and the physical well-being is taken care of. I have a treadmill in my bedroom, you know?
Wow.
So that's like, and kettlebells everywhere, you know, so to make sure that I can stay fit and literally just work like a machine.
Right. You're an Ubermensch.
Ubermensch, yes, exactly. Yes, speaking of that, basically here we are, two short women.
Yes.
Speaking of Nietzsche, oh man, I cannot wait to talk to you about Nietzsche, because it's not every day that I meet someone that I can talk to about Nietzsche.
Me either. I can't believe it. A woman,
Especially
no
another
less.
woman. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think I have met a Nietzschean who was a woman.
Yeah, I don't think I have actually.
They're all men, and then a lot of them don't understand Nietzsche. That's what I found. I
Yeah,
work with
I
people
agree.
who should, right? They're philosophers. They should know Nietzsche, but they don't.
I always say, like, Nietzsche is not to be read, he is to be
Yes.
felt.
Yes.
You've got to feel.
Exactly. Yes.
I think Nietzsche is probably the greatest human being ever lived in some respects, you know, in many respects, except for the fact that he was broke. You know, that part I
Yes.
don't like.
And seemingly unhappy a lot.
I sometimes question that, because he talks so much about happiness, and it feels like he has this internal happiness. You know, he seems like he does. Fundamentally.
He does. Elevated states. Yes. So I absolutely agree with you. And he was lonely, of course, because to be that's why he spoke to us, the future people, right? The future philosophers. And in a sense, that's sad, right? And he met Salome, instantly fell in love with her, and she was a Nietzschean herself, right? And so she rejected him because she wasn't really about men, right? She was about life and herself and the world. That broke his heart, I suppose. I mean, he had interesting friendships that were definitely not typical of the time period, nor this time period. You know, he was in love with her, and she was with another man who was an artist, and they were like a couple, a threesome, but they weren't together in that way. So that's very different. You know, that's something that most people can't handle, but they could, and they did because they were free thinkers and feelers.
Yeah, I'd really like to talk to you about Salome, because it is my understanding that she was a free-spirited kind of woman. You know, she had some very interesting friendships. Obviously, we don't know the details of those friendships. We don't know how much of it was maybe just purely scientifically driven and like an intellectually driven, and how much of it I believe that she had a pretty close relationship with Rilke, the poet.
Rilke, if you're German.
Yeah, Rilke,
which he was.
yeah. First things first. Let's go because I've got so many questions for you, and then we can come back to Nietzsche. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was, you know, as a professor of religion, you essentially study beliefs, right? And you look at like how they are formed and how they impact our actions. So what is your assessment of humanity's beliefs about women throughout history? And do you see an overarching theme that perhaps may have persisted across times and cultures? And how do these beliefs shape society's action towards women? How have they done it in the past? And to what degree do you still see remnants of that?
That's an excellent question. And I'm so happy that finally I have an interview where I can talk about women and the history of women and beliefs about women. And this is what I have found. I found that there isn't an overarching idea about women. Like, there is no transhistorical idea that women have been inferior to men throughout time. I think that's a misconception that most people have, is that this is the way it's always been. And it's not always been this way. So if you look in the historical record, one of the most wonderful things about being a professor is the people, you meet people who know about subjects that you're interested in. So in my university, we have departments of anthropology and history, and I have friends who are anthropologists, and so we have these discussions all the time, and we talk about societies in the past, in the archaeological record, that show that there were these women who basically ran their society. The men stayed home, took care of the children, and cooked the food, and the women hunted with these giant dogs, which were probably wolves. And this was a long time ago. And they were found in Siberia. So there were these women. They were even taller than the men. So the idea, that we have, that women have always been smaller, and that they've always been subordinate in a sense to men, is just absolutely wrong. It's not correct. And so we then, as like professors, especially a professor who wants to be accurate in handing down history to students, correct? Okay, so how do we do that? We have to do it in a way that's responsible, and to only focus on the works of men, and to only focus on the history of white guys. That's kind of the joke about philosophy. It's the history of dead white guys, right? But actually, no, it doesn't have to be. Like, we're talking about Salome, right? So there were women philosophers, but and I can explain how this process works. But in our culture, we have biases, and those biases, they form our perceptions. So they come before we make a judgment. So there's already a bias, and then we make a judgment about whether or not this person is worth being listened to or not. And so in our culture, we have a bias. When I talk about our culture, I'm talking about basically, unfortunately, almost global culture today, right? Women are not listened to as much as men. I mean, it's just a fact. In my country, the United States, we don't make as much money for the same amount of work. And in my profession, women are a minority. And in philosophy, I think at least when I was in graduate school in philosophy, women were about 10%. So it was 90% men. Okay, and I would bring that up. I'd say to my professors, who were all men, I'd say, why can't we study philosophers who are women or not white, from like Africa or something like that? Why can't we study those philosophers? And they didn't have an answer for me. So, and I was lucky to go to the University of California system. So we had people like Judith Butler, and at the time teaching in the University of California system, and they would come and they would teach women. She was a philosopher who graduated from Yale, and she wrote about women and gender, and she would come and talk to my classes. And so I would take classes from people in the women's studies department and people in the history department teaching about women's history, so that I could fill out my education. And I did this on purpose so that I could get a better idea of the full range of philosophy and ideas about women. So it is erroneous to say that women have always had made less money or didn't have property. In Egypt, women had property. A lot of it is classist as well. In a lot of societies, women who occupy positions of low class, right, no power, unfortunately, are treated much differently than women who have power and money. I mean, Salome, she had her own money, right? She came from a wealthy family, and I was going to mention that, but that's part of why she was able to meet these men. These men wouldn't be talking to her if she hadn't been super educated, right? So I think that that's one thing that I really admire about your work, is that you are promoting women in business. And I personally think that right now, that's the most important thing that we can do. That's why I enjoy the work that you do, because I think one of the most important things for women right now is to be economically autonomous. We have to be, in order to explore the full range of what being a human being is.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that last sentence you said about the whole range of what a human being is. If I were to say, and I know that Lex always asks people, what is the meaning of life? And I think that this is my understanding of Nietzsche's understanding of meaning of life. And you can tell me if you think my understanding of Nietzsche's understanding is wrong. But this is the way I see it. the meaning of life, and I've always been, this is something that I've always been thinking about as a child. I was like, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, who am I? I was like 4 or 5 years old, and it would drive myself mad. Like, honestly, I would drive myself mad. Like, I became depressed thinking, who am I? And I was like, wow, this is so crazy that I have feeling, that I can, like, what is, like, my skin and the veins in my eyes, and the fact that I can see, like, it's like, where was I before I came here? So what was it like before, right? And who am I? Like, I used to ask, and in Persian, that's man kiam. I was like, man kiam, like man kiam. I used to ask myself that, and then that question persisted until my early 20s, and I think eventually I came to an understanding of what life was and why I was here. It was like a combination of reading science and philosophy. Schrödinger talks about the meaning of life, or not the meaning, but he talks about what life is. And from his point of view, he's like, basically, the universe is always going towards a state of entropy and disorder. And every now and then, particles, this is like a paraphrasing, right? Particles randomly aggregate and create a form of order. They resist that, that entropy, and that is life, right? So essentially, life is like the boundary between this order and disorder, and that's what I love about Nietzschean concept of, the Dionysian and the Apollonian, right? Dionysian is the entropy and the destruction, and like, that orgiastic sense of life, like, Lex Hobbes talks about this. There's this Instagram account called Nature is Metal, and it's about how nature is like so cruel, essentially. That's Dionysian. That's the entropy. That's like the destruction. Then we have life, which is the Apollonian, trying to, the logic, and trying to kind of find some form of order. But the irony is that when these particles aggregate and they create life, and of course, then the higher form of that will be the intelligent life. The irony of it is that in doing so, they actually increase entropy, because, like, say, it's kind of like, you get your house in order, but then you create rubbish, and then that rubbish has to be put out, right? So it's kind of like, now we are destroying our planet, so we are looking at going to Mars, and to or find other planets, right? So this is the nature of life. It's like, is this kind of fight between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. And what Nietzsche was saying was that as humans, we've become too Apollonian. It's my understanding that, like, he's saying, we've become too Apollonian, too logical, and we have forgotten the essence, the Dionysian essence. If you think about the yin and yang, like, we've forgotten that Dionysian essence. For him, he's like, if you can get a balance between the two, that's where the full experience of life happens. And if I were to say, what is the meaning of life? It's about creating that balance between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. And that's when we call it like a state of flow. And if you think about a tightrope walker, right? Somebody who's walking on it. So that is like, that person, like, that person has to have a level of attention, presence, and be in a state of flow, to be able to do that. When you look at, an athlete, for example, that's the full expression of life in one aspect. When you look at, I love women's gymnastics, and when I was a child, I did that, but because I grew up in Iran, women were not allowed to do it, or like, it wasn't very easy, because you were not, you are not allowed to be seen by men, so you could never go and compete. So I had to kind of give up at an early age. But as you're training to be a gymnast, that's like, when you look at women's gymnastics in Olympics, like, that's just the absolute, and any sports, right? That's the absolute state of flow. And the meaning of life is to be in that, to be able to experience the full spectrum of the Dionysian and the Apollonian, and the bringing together of all of those contradictions, and to be able to live with them harmoniously, and to have both the order and the disorder together. And I think that's why Nietzsche, to me, it seems like he had that.
Yes, I think so too. And that was why it was difficult for him to relate to people generally. And you could feel it in his writings. I feel like you can feel that. I would call that, for want of a better word, I would call that energy. You could feel that energy come from his writings as you read. And for those who are open, us philosophers in his future, right? For those of us who are open, we naturally, it's sacred literature for us, his writings, you know? I mean, really, to me, he is an incredibly mystical writer and person. And the beauty of life really is conveyed through his writings. And I really love how you talk about the, combination of Apollo and Dionysus together in, and he also has this will to power, this idea of will to power. And in a sense, there is that too, this idea that, what is the will to power? Well, the will to power is basically this idea that you've risen above the conventions of your time, right? And he talks about that in the Beyond Good and Evil, where he talks about what is the nature of good and evil? Well, there is no, existential nature to it, or, there is no eternalist or determinist nature. We create it. And he says, and it's those who have the will to do this. And it's those who are the people who, what he calls the Übermensch, the people that can, and I think that this is what we have when he was with Salome and, I forgot the name of the artist she was with. It wasn't Rilke at the time, but they formed
Paul Ray.
That's right. Yes. So they formed this kind of threesome community, right? And I believe that they felt this energy all together. Imagine that,
I know.
And I think that some communities, rave communities, or where communities get together and there's music, and the audience is as much a part of it as the people who play the music, right? I think that you can actually feel this type of what I call energy, this type of what he called elevated states. So I don't want to put a California term in Nietzsche's mouth. He called these states elevated states, and so I should too. When I'm talking about Nietzsche. But I do feel that we can attain those states. And I feel that being the gymnast trains and trains and trains. This is the Apollo energy, right? And then when the gymnast does his or her routine, the Dionysian energy comes. And that's when you are taken away, right? You're taken into it. And you're, I'll give an example. In college, I had this boyfriend who's also a Nietzschean and a wonderful person. And still a friend of mine. And he played basketball, and he was playing basketball, and I was doing homework while he was playing basketball. And he was playing basketball, by the way, by himself. He was just shooting shots and everything. And all of a sudden, I felt that I needed to look up and watch him. And I looked up and I watched him, and he was making every shot. And so he would go further and further away from the hoop, and the further he got, he would say, I'm going to make this shot, and he'd make it. He then turned around. So his back was to the hoop, and he said, I can't miss. And he said it in such a triumphant way. And he shot the ball from behind, and he made it. And we both sat there in awe. I think that was a Dionysian moment right there. I'll never forget it. Because, yeah.
It's like, it must be. So now what does it have to do with women when you talked about the full expression? And I wrote down here not to forget, because I think we can, as humanity, we cannot have, as Homo sapiens, as our species, we cannot have a full expression without women being in the picture, because for me, women, I mean, again, it's metaphorically speaking, women for me are more a representation of the Dionysian, because they are less, if you think about like the potentiality, like the fact that women give birth, create life, right? So it's messy, like it's like when you think about even like the the way that our emotions changes through our cycle, through our lifetime. I think women are notoriously, at least it's been classified this way, that they have a lot of different emotions, and that's, I think, part of the reason why maybe they have been kept out of politics or many other areas of business and economy and all that stuff, which is a mistake, because we do need to embrace that level of Dionysian messiness and disorder. And in a way, more than ever, we need it now, because I think that artificial intelligence is like the pinnacle of the Apollonian. I think like that Apollonian faculty, if you will, has expressed itself, has grown, and that was what Nietzsche was worried about. Has grown and grown to a point that it's like our society has now become so heavily Apollonian, and because we haven't had women in the picture as these fields of study and science, education have been developed, women have been held back. They haven't been prominent they have, like you said, we've not been studying female philosophers. The reason why I'm so passionate about having women in business and technology and all fields, and to have them in the top tier, is because the female perspective will help us reach that state of flow as a species, I think. And
yes, I absolutely agree. So there's a female philosopher named Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. So some of the things that I found most compelling about her idea of ethics, because she wrote a lot about ethics as well as everything else, she was just brilliant, was this idea that she said there's what we call deontological ethics and then ontological ethics. So deontology is following rules. So it's basically the Apollonian ideal right there, following rules. And she said, this isn't going to cut it. And she said, I'll tell you why. She said, it's not going to cut it. Well, she didn't use those words, by the way. This is my paraphrasing of Hannah Arendt. When you walk through a district of poverty, right, abject poverty, you know it's wrong. And the reason you know it's wrong is because you have feelings of horror and disgust. And those feelings of pain and suffering, you feel for what you see. And those inform your idea of what should be done about poverty, right? So she put front and central these feelings, the aesthetic part of us, our feelings, into deontology and into ethics generally. We need to know, we need to be informed by how we feel about things. Feelings aren't just things that, they are things that come and go, but when we're confronted with something that seems absolutely wrong, like horrible abject poverty, okay, children living without food, these are things that are horrible, and to deny that, it would be to deny our humanity, right? To deny how we feel. We have these feelings. We've adapted these feelings for a reason. We have them. They've helped us evolve. So let us continue to create a better society, because we're horrified by the fact that women, and there's the feminization of poverty, it's called. So women, especially when they're without men, they get divorced or they have children and they don't have somebody to help them raise their children. They don't have money to feed their children. So all over the world, there's a crisis regarding women and children. And I think that it's pretty horrible. And I think we should be addressing that. And we should address it because we feel terrible about it. And if you can imagine yourself in that situation, I think that everyone would want to change it. Yes, I think that the process of hearing women is also a process of hearing how we've not been heard. Okay, yes. Which is, I can explain how that happens. How come women are not heard? Okay, so like I said, this isn't something that's transhistorical and universal. Women have been heard in societies. In other societies, I lived in Ireland for a brief time when I was a grad student. And my experience of women in Ireland was much different than my experience of women in the United States. They had a woman prime minister. There wasn't sexism like there is in the United States. And when I would talk about my experiences of women in philosophy, I'd talk to women philosophers there. they would say, well, we actually integrate women into our philosophy classes. We integrate texts from women. There are other countries that are better than at least my country in terms of treating women. And there are countries that are a lot worse. I think we have to acknowledge that too. So, but how does this happen? So in my field, I've seen how women were not acknowledged. Let's take the example of early Christianity. And it's a very interesting process. So this is how it generally goes. So let's take this woman who was a very powerful early woman Christian, and her name was Junia. Okay. And the first texts for Christians were the letters of Paul. And he was a friend of Junia's, and he called her an apostle. Okay. And so he talked about Junia, and Junia was everywhere, for a woman in these sacred texts. Okay. She was named, which is important because a lot of women in that sacred text aren't named, the Bible. And she had important roles. She was called an apostle. She was or was it a deacon? I'm sorry. I have to be specific, and I can't be specific. It was a role that was a very prominent role for a woman. She traveled. This was a time when Roman women couldn't travel without a guardian, a man, to be around with them. Okay, so she traveled. She brought Paul's letters different places where he wanted them to go, probably because he was in jail, for speaking out. These texts were written in Greek. So when they were translated into Latin, which happened, maybe in the 200s and in the 300s, but mostly in the 200s, the Romans who translated that this is where we talk about bias. Mm-hmm. Their society had a bias that women didn't hold high positions of power. Therefore, this must not have been a woman. Therefore, they translated her name as a male name. Mm-hmm. Okay. So did they do this maliciously? Probably not. They weren't like, we're going to hold women down. Let's hold women down by making Junius, this man now, instead of, no, I don't think so. I think they just did it because they couldn't conceive of a woman who was a strong leader in the early Christian church. So for then how many years? Like 1800 years or more, we use the Latin, and then it gets translated to English as a man. We use this form of the Bible. And so a lot of Christians and Christian women and Christian men, they didn't know Junius was a woman. They thought Junius was a man. And so it was only in recent times when, scholars get into this field, they go back and they say, wait a minute, that wasn't actually a male Roman name or a Greek name, so, how did that happen? And so they traced it back, and they went and they corrected it, right? It's not corrected in every edition of the Bible now. It's only corrected in some. So this is how it's done. There are processes in which I would say non-white people, and in my culture, kind of the Western United States and Western Europe, where women are just not paid attention to. They're written out, or people can't believe that they could possibly have been and done what they did. Another example, I was at the Vatican Observatory, and most people don't know that the Vatican has an observatory, but they do. And it's been around for a long time. It's really beautiful. It's up in Castle Gandolfo, which is where the popes have their summer. They go and they summer there. And it's on this big volcanic lake. So it's incredibly beautiful. And what I noticed there, I was a guest, and I was given access to their archive. I was looking at space research, okay? And in fact, they keep all of their space research there in this archive. And what I noticed was that the director of the archive is a monk, a Jesuit monk, and his name is Guy Consolmagno. And he put pictures up from their record, from their archive, of the women who did all the star maps that were used to identify, what was up in the sky, planets, constellations, things like that. It was all these nuns were doing all the star maps. And I thought, somebody needs to write about this because nobody knows about this. And it is the same thing in the history of computer science, as you know. Yeah. There were all of, and so I remember in philosophy, my wonderful professor, one of my first philosophy professors, would always give credit to the first computer program created by a woman. And of course, I can't remember her name.
Ada Lovelace.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you. Why are we reading that history? That's the question. Yes. And
Yeah,
the question,
exactly.
and so the answer is I don't necessarily think it's malicious. I think it's just biases that we have that we actually have to change, and we do have to change those because
Yeah.
I'm pretty much sick of them.
Yeah, no, I
I'm
agree.
sick of
I
it.
mean, we have a very small window of opportunity to change it, because the way that artificial intelligence is going to completely change our, or it has already started to change, change us as a species.
Yes.
And that is built upon that Apollonian male-driven thinking and faculties. It's really worrying, because it means that the future of humanity could be this imbalanced. It's basically like just doing everything with your like left hand or something like that,
Yes.
like never using your
Yes.
right hand or your your right leg, so we're overusing one side of our abilities, our emotions. um I wanted to ask you, in my book, about the future work, I talk about the fact that as humans, we have three faculties or three capacities, or you could say four, and that's where I'm going to talk to you about, because I think you're, as a theologian, you would be the best person to talk to about. So basically, I'm saying that we have three main capacities that we know of: physical, cognitive, and emotional. And technology is the name that we give to the tools we create to enhance these capacities. And it always starts with enhancing, and then it goes to replacing. So
Yes.
first we enhance, and then we outsource, right?
Yes.
So the first industrial revolution, and the millennia leading up to it, was all about enhancing our physical abilities. That's why today we have to go to the gym. In the past we didn't used to go to the gym because
Right.
we didn't need it, right? Because we had a lot of movement. But now we have to do that because evolutionary, our body still needs that movement, but we are not getting that, and that's why we have to do these exercises. And then the computer revolution was about enhancing and disrupting our mental or cognitive abilities. For me, I feel like artificial intelligence is where we are seeing. So when I say computer revolution, I mean not necessarily artificial intelligence. I'm talking about the earlier form, where it was like you're programming a machine to do the same, to do
Sure.
things, right?
Yeah.
Like
So it
like
changed
if,
our
even
memories. Yeah.
exactly, like even in
Yeah.
a calculator, right? Even just
Right.
using a calculator, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we're disrupting our cognitive abilities. And then artificial intelligence is now disrupting our emotional abilities as well, because it's interacting with us in a way that, even if it's not emotionally aware, even if it's not necessarily conscious, it's impacting the way we feel, and the way that we are going to have this perception of our feelings and emotions. So arguably, you could say that as humans, we also have another dimension. So the fourth dimension, which you could call it the spiritual, or I think that's where religion comes from. It's like, that sense of looking for that meaning, that flow, right? Right.
Yes. The transcendent.
The
Yes.
transcendent, right? Yes. So I know that you mentioned in your podcast, with interview with Lex, you said that you're a practicing Christian or Catholic. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm a practicing atheist. I'm an atheist. I became an atheist, and I'll tell you the story of it. Was I became an atheist when I reached puberty. And I remember my mom said that I couldn't go into a mosque when I had my period, because I wasn't clean. And I was like, "What do you mean I'm not clean? I've had a shower, like I'm like you." And she was like, "No, like you can't." And I'm like, "You're telling me that God, if there was a God, you're telling me that this God is saying that half of my creations, like half of the humanity, for a week per month, are not allowed to come to to me, because it wasn't just that you couldn't go to mosque, it's also that you shouldn't pray, like you are like, we have
Oh,
this like three times a
right.
day prayer thing,
Of
right?
course, you
Right.
couldn't do
And I was
that.
like,
Wow.
yeah, you couldn't, no. So I'm like,
Wow.
I do not understand. So you're not supposed to fast. Okay, I understand, maybe that's from maybe there's some kind of scientific thing beyond it, because you're losing, your body is losing nutrients, but like you're not supposed to pray. Like you're not allowed to pray when you have your period. And I'm like, all right, my business with this religion is over, and I was like, because I always asked questions about it. Obviously,
Sure.
I had those
Sure.
inclinations, but when that was the point where I'm like, goodbye, religion and God, like I'm just like,
Yes.
I'm not doing that.
Well, I don't blame you. Yes, I don't blame
Yeah,
you.
so almost lost track of what I was trying to say with that. But essentially, where was I going with that? It was
there's the idea of the transcendent. So
yeah, the transcendent.
AI,
yes, the transcendence. So that's why it's like this is coming from an atheist. Now I do meditate, and obviously I'm a Nietzschean. There are things that I don't understand, and the things that I don't understand, sometimes I feel that I can feel. And the more I reach that state of flow, like for example, I have a very strong moral code that doesn't come from religion. For me, my moral codes come from, the way I see it is like everything that I do that I feel is not right. If anything I do that my heart, my gut says this is not right, what that is like a mark on my character, and it impacts me being able to live in that state of flow. It's kind of like, the way I see it is like, if you were an athlete, and you're training for the game of your life, you need to be very good with your diet. You need to, wake up, like have that discipline, right? And anything that you do that impacts that, you're not going to be in that state of flow on that day, right? That's my morality, essentially. So I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of these 4 capacities, and could it be that by allowing technology to help us enhance and maybe replace some of those other aspects, that we could reach that state of flow more easily? Or will that make it harder? I just, because I know, so your most recent book is, tell me about the most recent book. I think this is coming kind of. Yes,
it is very close to it. So it's American Cosmic. Did you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, as American Cosmic. Yes.
Okay. So I say, so first let me explain my religion, my Christianity, Catholicism. I get harassed by, and also I'm provided with a lot of encouragement. Okay. I tell people this about it. I had a very powerful experience when I was 11. So I also, like you, thought deeply when I was really young, which is kind of bad because it makes you somewhat depressed as a child to think these things, right? I could tell that the Bible had a lot of inaccuracies when I read it, because I read it when I was 11, and I said, I'm either going to grow up and be a nun, or I'm going to grow up and be a professor of religion, so I could actually find out where, what is going on here. Because I had a feeling that there was something transcendent, but I didn't know what it was. And I spent a lot of time searching for it. And I explored all the different religions. And, I'm from California, in this new age environment, which is eclectic. So there's convert Buddhists and Hindus, and people that aren't from the indigenous cultures but are converted and things like that. So I went through a lot of reading these primary texts and talking with people, and then of course I went to graduate school among people who were Buddhists in training, priests in training, sisters in training, nuns in training, people like that from all cultures. And then I got my PhD in religion, and of course I studied philosophy. So you could say that my whole life has been spent doing this, okay? So what does this mean? This means that when you look at the church, say I take the Catholic Church as an example, it looks pretty bad, okay? It's completely looks anti-woman, right? And misogynist even. I won't go into too much of it, but yeah, it looks bad. However, from my perspective, I went to an all-girls Christian, it was a Catholic school run by sisters. And I lived in California during the time period when in El Salvador and all throughout the Central American countries, terrible things were happening there. People were being disappeared. people were being killed routinely. It was horrific, and these people would find refuge in Catholic churches, and they would come to California. The sisters were intimately and immediately there to help these people, and they would come and tell us, these girls who were in their classes, about their experiences. And to me, I looked at my parents, who had been educated kind of ex-hippie types, right? But then got really nice jobs and drove nice cars. And I said to myself, who would I rather be like? I would rather be like these sisters, and I would rather be out, and I read Oscar Romero, in the works of these Catholic people who were, who, by the way, the church did not like them, okay? The church condemned them, and they were people who were for feeding children and keeping people alive, all right? And like Oscar Romero, let's take him as an example. He was assassinated in a hospice on Christmas Eve, giving a sermon to these people who were dying, and he himself was assassinated. And why? Because he had told the police to stop hurting people. He basically said, police, it is you who, you get these rules from on high. Why are you following them? Why do that to human beings? You know what you're doing. When you kill these children, when you disappear their mother, when you do this, why are you doing this? And then he was assassinated. And this is when I was young. And I saw the sisters that were going down there, they were also assassinated. So to me, it was an urgent. This is urgent. This is not something that we can just watch on TV and then forget about. This was something that I was immersed in because of my childhood and my high school education. And so I chose at that point to live this type of life. And I said, I believe, my mother's Jewish. I said, I believe my mother, who's good, will be in heaven. Okay, if there's a heaven. I believe, so I do question my faith, but I don't assume that my faith is the magisterium of the Catholic Church, or the Pope for that matter. They are not my church. My church are those people who were assassinated helping other people. So that's what I make a distinction between the people's church and then the people who like to call themselves the rule makers of the church. The rules of the church change. I've shown that in almost every paper that I've written, in almost every book that I've written. The rules of the church have changed. They're not universal. They're not transhistorical. So yeah, so I'm not a typical Catholic, I guess you could say. But I know very many Catholics who are in positions of power who think just like that. So there are many Catholics who do that. Okay, so this idea of the transcendent and technology, now let's get to that part. This idea of transcendence is really interesting because Nietzsche was trying to get to an atheistic transcendence, and he did, yes. Okay? Yes. And I admire, and that's why I feel like I am a Nietzschean Catholic, okay? So if I were to choose, well, that would be hard for me, let's put it that way, because I know so many good sisters, who are helping people, nuns and sisters and people like that. Nietzsche didn't seem to be compassionate that much about other people. And so I guess that's where I differ from him. But he did say that the compassion of the superhuman, the Übermensch, was a beautiful compassion because it came from a sense of a place of reality, of character, instead of rules. And I think that's what you're trying to say about yourself, is that you don't have a sense of, these rules outside yourself that you follow and therefore feel good about yourself. You actually have an internal idea of what is right and wrong. And if you don't follow it, it stops you from living your full life of experience, of the what Nietzsche would call the elevated state. And I want to get to that because I think it's really important. So Nietzsche had this idea of the abyss. Remember his quote about the abyss, when he talked about the abyss?
When you look too much into the abyss.
It looks back. Okay. Yes. Now I take this literally. Yes. Literally. He is not being metaphorical. That's the beauty of Nietzsche, is a lot of people misinterpret him as being metaphorical. And he's literal. He's basically saying, when you get to this point of elevation in your being, when you get to this elevated state, life speaks to you. And that's beautiful. And that was that's in the Gay Science. I think it's aphorism 274 or something like that. But it's this really beautiful idea that I've experienced myself, and you may too, because of meditation. So when you do practices of meditation and you do practices of prayers that are where basically what you're trying to do is get rid of any kind of programs and preconceptions, biases about life, so that you can feel and be with life on its own terms, then that's when life starts to talk to you. That's when events become synchronistic and beyond coincidence. And I've known in my book, American Cosmic, what I write about are the scientists who live in the state. And so they are actually Dionysian scientists. So you'd think that all scientists are Apollonian, right? And they follow these strict scientific method and these rules. But what I found out was that the most successful of these scientists were completely Dionysian, in the sense that they felt that they were getting, and these are people who created technologies, sold their technologies on NASDAQ for $100 million, their companies for many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, undisclosed amounts, okay, but a lot. And so they're all millionaires and billionaires. And I've met a lot of them when I did research for this book. And what I found was that they did not follow the rules. They basically accessed information that they shouldn't have had access to. And I saw that this was the history of technology, Somi, really, is the history of technology. It is the history of our space program. So if you go back into the space program, if you read the first part of my book, I spent some time looking at the Russian and the American space programs, and you'll find a lot of weirdness there, okay? You'll find that a lot of the people who created the calculations to get us actually out into space found that they were doing it through what you and I would call these kinds of ways. It was almost as if they felt like they were connected to a source that was outside of themselves. It wasn't almost, they felt that they were connected to a source outside of themselves. Each of them had different terms for it.
Yeah, I completely, I've lived that. I feel like I've lived that all my life. Like I remember, if I show you a picture of where I was born and brought up, nobody around me spoke English. My parents had never left in their hometown. And look, here I am now having this conversation with you. And, this is just the start of our journey. The way that I managed to transform my life, to get, I only became a British citizen 5 years ago. 2015, right? Until then, I couldn't start a business. I couldn't travel. There's so many things I couldn't do. So I was living in the UK I came here as a student, and it took me 11 years to become a British citizen. I remember 2000 and I think it was 19 or 18. I remember 2018. I started doing these business breakfast meetings at the Ivy Club in London, which is a beautiful club. And I started to invite people, like, for example, some of the people that came to my breakfast meetings were like, the chief marketing officer of BBC, or the managing director of Louis Vuitton, managing director of Marie Claire magazine, who is now a very good friend of mine. The CEO of Bentley,
amazing.
These were the kind of people that came to my breakfast meetings. And I remember the first one that I had, I went into the bathroom as I was waiting for people to arrive. And I had, this beautiful, the beautiful room, and I paid for the breakfast for 12 people, and they came, and they were like all people at those levels. And as I was waiting for people to arrive, I was early, I went to the bathroom and I cried, because I thought, because I was like, I made this happen,
Wow.
and that is like, that's when you're like accessing that
the will to
whatever.
Power.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And to me, like, the will to power is about self-overcoming, and and like you say, raising above. And that's why, if you look at the tagline for Femtech, for Fempeak, the think tank for women in business and technology, is about raising women's socioeconomic status through the application of technology. So raising women's socioeconomic status, and then we are using technology as a vehicle to do that. The kind of people I've been surrounded by, and it's just, doors just open. And when you look at it, and the way I see it, when you have a mindset of like, life should be like that all the time for everybody. That's what, like, life is about, abundance. And it's about, a sense of increase. And if you can do that for yourself and for everybody else, then the way I see it, going back, part of the reason why I feel like I need to go and get that PhD is because, as a philosopher, I have all these thoughts and things that I feel like I need to be able to communicate, but I know that you don't get taken seriously until you have that PhD, you know.
Sadly, yes.
Is that, that's the problem, right? But I see myself as a transition architect. We are going through these fast transitions through with technology, and the way I see it, we are not prepared for it. Our generation, millennials, our job is to make sure, because we are the only link between the pre-digital and post-digital, you know, and
yes.
it's our job, our generation, to make sure that this happens and this transition goes smoothly. And I'm hoping to do that for our generation. And I really feel that women are the key, you know, that like, we really need to have women at the table. You know, you talked about compassion. You know, sometimes people say that I don't have enough compassion, or, you know, I think we have this view of, sometimes people mix up empathy and sympathy, right? You know,
yes.
And maybe that view of, I think what Nietzsche was not for was sympathy, but he did have empathy, right?
He did. Yes, he did. I don't know if it's a true anecdote from his life. It could be, but I just don't know. But there's that anecdote that later in his life, he witnessed the beating of a horse. A horse was being whipped, and he broke down in tears, right? And when tried to stop it. So he obviously had feelings of empathy, right, for others. But I agree with you. He was not for rule-based ideas about this, and I agree with you entirely. Yes.
I think the reason why I want women at the table when we are talking about the morality of technology, you know, the ethics of technology, is that it has a level of complexity that is beyond the Kantian notion of the categorical imperative, you know, like it's like, it's messy, right? When you look at now, as we are trying to build these algorithms, you know, when you look at the driverless cars, for example, these are things where I think rather than the critique of judgment, it's not about judgment anymore, or judgment is not enough. We need to access, right? We need to access that transcendental kind of place. And I just think we can't reach that without women. I don't think that you can rely on just one side of humanity to do that.
I agree with you about this idea that we haven't caught up with where we're at technologically. I see that exactly right now in all over the school system. I'm a teacher. It's worse in the actual schools for children than it is in the higher education, you know, the colleges and universities, because at least in the universities, people have been using technology. Like I've been teaching online and using technology for 17 years, right? But most people haven't, and nobody has almost at the level where they're teaching children. And so we have a devastating time right now all over the world with this COVID situation that's forcing everyone to be using technologies that they don't even know how to use them or what they are. And so you have parents then who are not, they can't adapt fast enough. The school systems can't adapt fast enough. So I'm wondering, what I see is like the beginning of a major stratification in class, you know, because we're going to have a lot of kids who are left behind because their parents aren't able to help them keep up. I have to help my kids learn the platforms and things like that in order for them to keep their grades up. I can't imagine, I have a flexible job and I know the software platforms and things like that. I can't imagine not, and also have computers. Think of the people who don't have computers, who don't know the platforms and things like that. So, I mean, these are the kinds of needs, and this is the kind of thing that I think that you're worried about, right? And your generation is that link. You're right, because my kids are the generation then that's completely online. Okay.
Yeah. But they've never seen anything but.
No,
right?
They haven't. Yeah, it is their reality now. And that is all of our reality now, right? So all of us live in that reality. Some of us, like me, remember prior to that. Now I'm from California in the Silicon Valley region. So we were the first to kind of be immersed in that. By the time of 8th grade, we had computers. And then when I was in college, we had email. I lived my whole childhood without it, right? And then boom, there it was. learned it and realized that this was the game changer, just like it had been predicted by Heidegger and people like Taylor Deschardins and people like that. And here it is. Now we're in it, right? We are completely in it now. And so the question is that who's going to keep up, Somi? That's the question. Who? I think it's the people who are the tech giants and their ilk. And so what I think you're asking is, how can we make it right? How can it be more democratic? How can more people access this new life that we have?
The way I look at it is that, like, the fact that there are 5 companies in the US and 5 companies in China running the world.
Yes, pretty much.
And they are all run and founded by men. What I want is half of those to be women, you know?
Yes.
Like I want another 10, another 10, right? And those 10 have to be led by women. And how do we do that? That's why I started this. I'm super interested in Peter Thiel, actually, because I usually tell people, if you really want to understand where things are going, like, watch Thiel, because he wrote the foreword for a book called The Sovereign Individual, which I think is one of the best books I've read, which in terms of making me understand the trend of technology and where things are going. I happen to actually agree with what they say. It's actually very Nietzschean in a way, and it's like, like on the surface, you may read that book and say there's no compassion in this, but actually it's very Nietzschean, because it's all about, you need to be an active participant, not, well, that's how I put it. This is my terminology. But this is my understanding. It's like, if you want to succeed in this age of technology, you need to be an active participant, not a passive observer, and that's my understanding of where Thiel is going with that. My worry is, because when I look at, and I mentioned to you, Eric Weinstein, that I discovered his podcast through Lex, and I'm hoping, maybe I send them this episode. I'm going to send actually this episode to Eric, because I would really like to sit down one day and talk to Eric and Peter Thiel. But especially, there are a few things that came to my attention. I really like Eric, but at the same time, there are things he says that sometimes makes me wonder about women. Like, for example, it's my understanding, at least he's suggesting, that women are not as good in mathematics, or that women are maybe not as good coders. My problem with that statement is that you do not know that. Like, we haven't given women enough of an opportunity to go out there and do these things. Like, they've been bogged down by family and, by, like, when you look at the fact that women have had always the double burden of working for pay and not pay, so they've got that entire, basically, all women are working 2 jobs. Most men are working only 1 job. I'm not necessarily saying, no, that's wrong, because I don't have evidence. There's not enough scientific evidence. And I actually asked this question of Sarah Seger, who's an astronomer at MIT, and also I discovered through Lex's podcast. And I asked her, I said, do you think men and women learn math differently? Because sometimes I wonder whether could it be that women learn math differently? Because there are some studies that show that when women do math problems, that they maybe use different parts of their brain, the way that they use their brain. So I don't know the exact terminology, but could it be, that's one thing, is that our educational system has been built upon a male model. So could it be that the way that we teach math and physics and STEM fields, that is more conducive to the way that men learn? That's one question. The second question is, we can't say that women are not as good at these fields because we haven't had enough opportunity. Let me give you another example. There is a book called Invisible Women that I'm going to actually write to Eric, because at some point I want to interview him. But I want him to read that book because it's such an interesting book. It talks about how, for example, when women go on sabbatical, they end up doing work, like, housework, and like children work, right? Whereas when men go on sabbatical, they actually manage to focus on, whatever it is that they're doing.
Yes, why they're on sabbatical. Yes.
We are not taking those things into consideration. So my worry is, on the one hand, I'm really interested in a lot of topics that these guys are talking about. The sovereign individual, to me, it's a Nietzschean book. It's like,
yes.
Step up, take an active stance. Otherwise, you're going to be irrelevant. And to 90% of society reading that will be like, this is just bullshit. Like, this is like, you're going to leave us behind. And I'm like, look, I was born and brought up in absolute poverty in a society where it was very oppressive towards women. But I changed that. I changed my situation. And you can do too. Like, I believe that anybody can, but it takes work. And it's not easy. So for women, there's this additional layer of complexity. I always give that example on the website. I gave this little picture of, when a woman wants to start a business, they are not starting from a flat surface. They have a mountain in front of them that first they have to break that down before they can even flatten the field to be able to even start. So
yes,
I just wonder, people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, all of these guys that are building these technologies. I wonder whether they can see this Dionysian and Apollonian conversation that we had, like whether they can see that our society is going to be imbalanced if we don't have women in the picture as, we make these decisions for the future of humanity. And that's worrying.
Yes. I have been telling my students forever since I've been teaching, you better learn to use technology or it will use you. And I said, you cannot be a passive user of technology, like just watching video games all day or just looking at Netflix or, doing this program or that, or, this video game. No, you better learn how to code. You better learn to create. You better be a content provider. You better, because this is our relationship with technology. Technology, in a sense, you call it Apollonian, and it may have been created through Apollonian means, but it is fully Dionysian. It's going to take us over.
Technology itself. Yes. Technology, big umbrella of technology, it's, because it's one form of, that one form of life, if you will, one form of that.
And we are its host species. We are its host. We literally host technology, even biotechnologies, right? We're their host. I don't know what's going to happen, Somi. I honestly don't know. And while I have enthusiasm and incredible love of life, I also see the dangers on the horizon and the darkness on the horizon, just like Nietzsche did, by the way. He also saw that. I do my best to help. To help students, to help my children, to help people around me, to help myself even, because it's not easy doing what I do. And it's not been easy for me. I've worked for everything that I've done. It wasn't, although my parents were well off, they didn't treat money well themselves. And therefore I worked myself through college. I earned my PhD on my own through scholarships and things like that. And nothing was given to me, but I always had the will to power. I always did. So I always said to myself, I'll probably not get a job as a professor, but it doesn't matter because I'll work. I'll do what it takes, right? I'll make it work, what I do. And I did. And I actually was lucky enough to get a PhD. I got a job prior to getting my PhD. So I agree with you that you have to be that sovereign individual or you're going to get mowed over, right? Now, that is a terrible way to put it.
And sorry to interrupt, their topic or concept of sovereign individual is more like, basically they're talking about people like Musk or Bill Gates, that they're talking about the fact that there are going to be individuals that are going to be like a country.
Yes, absolutely.
That type of thing, right?
And
imagine a world where, like, okay, but there's no women in that picture, and that worries me, and and one of the I know maybe last topic for today, because I feel like I could talk to you forever, but I'm aware of the fact that I've kept you for so long. But last topic for today, let's talk about gender, because technology is genderless, right? And sometimes when I think about the fact that the way that our views towards gender is changing, and people talk about like in the past we didn't have this concept of, not to the same degree, like the way that we think about either transgender or non-binary, and now we are in this place of people having to actually say what they identify as.
Yes.
We didn't have that before, and I wonder whether there is a parallel between technology and the way that the question, or that the subject of gender.
Non-binary. Yeah.
Yes, right.
There is. Yes. Lex gave me 3 books that he wanted me to say impacted me, and I gave him 4 books, I think.
You gave him, you gave gay science. I remember that.
Yeah. And so I also want to say that I was incredibly impacted by the work of 2 feminist philosophers, Judith Butler and Donna Haraway. And
Okay.
Judith Butler wrote Bodies That Matter. And she, I think it kind of out of her control, but she created the idea of queer, right? And this idea of transgender and things like that. This was going on when I was in college in California. So I was right in the midst of it. And these are both incredibly brilliant people. And basically, in Bodies That Matter, which, by the way, is a very difficult book to get through. However, if you get through it, you will have learned an incredible amount. So she accesses Nietzsche, she accesses Kant, she goes through the whole philosophical tradition here. And she basically says that there's basically nothing that's gendered. Well, let's just put it this way. There's no gender. It's a very difficult concept, but I saw it as very Buddhist. This idea that we have to take away our conceptions of gender. There's non-binary. Okay, so then let me go to Donna Haraway's work is a lot easier to describe than Judith Butler's work. I will have to say, read Judith Butler's Bodies That Matter or Gender Trouble, and you'll get an idea. She's an amazing scholar. Donna Haraway wrote this book called The Cyborg Manifesto, and it basically was about technology and biotechnology, and she knew exactly where we were headed. She was, way ahead of her time. She was given a lot of credit during her time because of her brilliance, but I don't think that people at the time, it was almost like she was hitting us with a ton of bricks, right? She was basically saying that we are now cyborgs, and a cyborg is the idea of the binaries of machine and bodies, or human bodies and machines. We can't have that anymore. We don't, it's actually untrue. There are no more binaries. This binary of nature and non-nature, of man and female, of animals and humans, and all of these binaries that we have are completely Nietzschean, would say, created binaries, created ways that we understand our world. And technology is now breaking those down to the point where those don't even exist. So they're basically showing us that they never really existed in the first place, is what she's saying. And I really resonated with her work. That said,
absolutely, yeah, go ahead. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, you should read that, The Cyborg Manifesto. I can send you some of my work too, because I actually use a lot of her work. A lot of my academic work is not, people don't access academic work, which I understand why, but they're in textbooks and things like that but I'll send you some. And one is called The Techno-Hybridity, Human and Techno-Hybridity. And so basically, I live in a world where I live at, when I say I live in this world, I'm a university professor, which means that I'm immersed within communities of human beings who don't call themselves anything. They're non-gendered. Okay. And so when I walk into the classroom, I used to say, "Hey guys, how are you doing?" I don't say that anymore, because that's, I'm gendering them, that they don't want to be gendered that way. So I now use the colloquial Southern term, y'all. I go in and say, "Hey y'all, how are you doing today?" So, and plus I have children, and they're growing up in this world, and they have their own ideas about being what they are, and they don't like it when I say, "Oh, you look so pretty today," or something like that. Okay. And so they resist these kinds of terms. So we're actually living in this world. I live in this world. So I think that a lot of people would suggest that, first of all, there's a danger here in losing the term woman, because I believe that we are still, women are a category that needs to be. J.K. Rowling was just harassed for this, but needs to be kept as a special category because there was an issue with women in sports, and transgender women were winning all the sports, but they were men before they were women, and they have different physiological bodies. So some sports, especially MMA, for example, mixed martial arts, said that there has to be a separate category. Transgender women, at least not yet, can't have children. I have children, and it has impacted my life in fundamental ways, and and impacted my career and everything like that. It's very difficult for me to speak about these issues because they are so incredibly politicized at this moment. There could be a Twitter flame war against me by saying, women need to that has happened to people.
Maybe I'm a little bit like a kitten that's not afraid of fire. I don't care. I'm just going to say it. I really like you said losing women. Like, I worry that we may lose women because we are, for millennia, it's all been male dominated. And now we are going into this, non-gender realm. My worry is that we haven't had a balance of the two genders to this point, and I really don't want to lose women. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, look, I don't have children, and I decided not to have children. It's one of the things that, for example, Eric Weinstein, he often has arguments with people about this around, the role of women as child bearers. He basically says, it's my understanding that that's what women should do, and that's a good thing. But I have my own reasons for not wanting children. Then the main reason, I think,
that sounds really old-fashioned, by the way.
It is, and it worries me, because I wonder if that's his view, whether it's also Peter Thiel's view, which means that we should all be sitting home and maybe not.
I don't think it is, or else I don't think he would have invited me to speak to him if it was his view.
Yeah, I hope so.
I give him the
because my argument is that I want to see equal number of women in business and technology in the top tier, where decisions are made about the future of humanity. Now, like I said, I have my own reasons for not wanting children. I think it comes down to the fact that I had a very difficult childhood. I didn't have a good relationship with my mother, and I used to tell her, why did you bring me here? Because life was so hard. My childhood was just so bad that I remember even after I came to the UK, when I was a student here, there was times where things was really tough, and sometimes I talked to her on the phone, and I was like, why did you bring me here if you couldn't support me, if you couldn't have that's when I kind of told myself I'm never going to have children. There are enough children that don't have parents, and I may adopt, but I'm not going to have my own children. And the other thing is that I wanted to do all of this, and if I,
of course,
because if I was born and brought up in the West, if I didn't have to work, if I didn't have to wait for 11 years to get British citizenship, by the time when I was 23, I was trying to get out of a forced marriage in Iran and try to leave the country to come here, right? So I was forced to marry my cousin, like my first cousin.
Wow.
So when you come from that kind of difficult background, you have so much drive to go and do something with your life, and it feels like children will just get in the way, because you cannot guarantee that you will have the right kind of partner. So I decided children not for me. Going back to that gender and technology thing, one of the things that's like my goal, as I'm building this thing, success that I gain, I would like to be able to invest in research around technology that gives women the opportunity or the option to have children outside their body, not necessarily like this, going back to this, gender kind of thing. It's like being a woman, I don't think you're defined by having children.
Yes.
I feel like a woman in every possible way, right?
Yes.
And you may ask, what does that feel like? A lot of people could think like, oh, I come across, or I am generally a dominant person because I have to be, because you have to be able to bulldoze your way to gain any kind of success in business and technology. Being a woman is not about being submissive. It's not about being subservient. It's not about having children. There is a quality of womanness that I feel in my gut, and that quality of womanness is beautiful to me, and I think it should be preserved. That would be like my kind of final word on that. My final word on that. The irony is, of all the podcasts of Eric Weinstein that I listened to, probably the most interesting one was, well, two of them that I really liked. One of the two most interesting one was one of them where he talks to his 14-year-old son, who on that podcast, as they're talking, he becomes 15. It's like his birthday. And this boy's opinions and the way that he talks about gender is so nuanced. And it's like, wow, like if all Gen Zers are going to be like that, like that's a very good future, in terms of like the way he's just paraphrasing, but it's kind of like, yes, his masculinity matters to him, but he also understands that the conversation of gender is like it has to be held, because for a very long time, obviously, women have been in the position that we have been discussing throughout this topic, into this conversation today. And he understands that conversation has to be had, and that kind of conversation of whether it's equality of opportunities, all of that. And I was like this is great, like a 15-year-old, to be able to have that.
That's the case right now. From my own children and
how old are they?
To their friends. My children are between the ages of 13 and 17,
mm-hmm.
and I have some twins. So they are absolutely aware. The whole conversation that was started by, forever, it seems, but really got going in the 1980s and onward, about transgender, essentialist categories of men and women, and how some people feel that they're in a body that appears to be a woman's body, but they feel like a man. So they're aware of these kinds of ideas. That's why these terms like non-binary comes about. And my students as well, with the use of pronouns and things like that. And then the use of no pronouns. Like there's now a movement of, it's not no pronouns in the old sense, like, we assume that this is a man or this is a woman. This is basically make no assumptions. This is a new way of being. Make no assumptions about who and what I am. Just talk to me as you find me.
That worries me, because that's where I wonder whether we might lose the womanness, the woman.
Yes.
I don't want to lose women.
No, well, I mean, the problem is that you still have the feminization of poverty. You still have women who do the same job. And, so if we talk like there is no category of women, and this has been a conversation that seems to have been going on around me for like 20 years. Like, can we preserve the category of women? And I remember my professors having major fights about this, all right? And I thought, I was so confused, like, can't we just get over it? But no, we can't, because we're still having that conversation. So, women, it's like the problem of women or something like that, okay, I agree that it's true. There's moving, because of technology, we're moving into a completely, and probably always have been, non-binary world, but we pretended we were living in this framework of binaries. Okay. So we've lost the pretense, and here we are. What do we do now that women still only make a certain amount of money for the same work that men do? Okay, We've got to address that situation. And are the sovereign individuals going to address that? I don't think so.
No, we need female sovereign individuals.
Exactly.
That's what we
need to do it. Yeah, exactly, because they're not going to do it for us.
No.
And they're not going to care. That's when you said you wanted to have this conversation about this with, I forgot his name, the person who thought that women weren't as good at math or code.
Oh, Eric Weinstein.
Yeah, don't have that conversation. As far as I'm concerned, that conversation's already done. We know that women just haven't had the opportunities to do it. And when they do, they're good at it, as good as other people. Okay. And so I think that my daughter is right now in the North Carolina School of Math and Science, and it's a merit-based school. It's a residential school, and it's one of the hardest schools to get into for kids in the country. And she did that through her hard work in science and technology. And there are lots of girls there, or non-binary people that identify as girls, that are there, or people that identify as girls and happen to be in girls' bodies, who are excellent at math and science. That conversation, I don't think you need to spend time on.
I don't know. I think it's important because this person, Eric Weinstein, is the right hand to Peter Thiel. So these are people. Maybe
met him and not even
you may have. You may have. You may have.
I'm giving him a little bit of my mind there.
Yeah, because these are people who are having an impact on the way that the way that we fund science and technology,
absolutely.
So that's why it's important to have that
conversation.
I want to look into the person's eyes and say, tell me that I'm not good enough at business or at, because business is doing math, Last thing I'd say is that I always mention this since I had an interview with Professor Alessandra Casa of San Francisco University. And she said that the differences between sexes is much less than the differences within the sexes. So it was like, you talk about the, right? Like that, she was like, people often think like male alpha, woman, like not, and basically what she's saying is like within the category of women, there is so much more differences in the way that the alphaness and all that stuff. There's so many more differences within the category than between the sexes, because she was like, it's a very lazy thing essentially to say that men are like this, women are like this. So there are many, many more variations, and you can look at the spectrum of male, female, and within the female, genetic psyche, all that stuff, and men. That was like the most important point that I took away from that conversation, and I've been mentioning it since then.
That's what you need to tell our friend
Eric. Yes, I'm going to tell him. Well, it's been an amazing conversation, and I'm looking forward to your book being available in audio format, because I'm an audio learner.
It is available.
Is it now? Because
yes,
I checked. Oh, but your name, it doesn't come up on Audible.
It should come up.
Okay, I'm going to check again.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to it. Yes, I can't wait, because and you mentioned I remember when you were with Lex, you mentioned about something about your next book, and you said that one is going to be much more accessible.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about what it's about?
Sure. So basically what I'm doing is I'm offering a book. I say offering because I get asked a lot about the ways, you call it self-overcoming, this will to power that Nietzsche talks about. Well, in every major religious tradition and philosophical tradition that I've come upon, there are excellent strategies and techniques to do exactly this. And so over my years of studying these, I've accumulated a long list of these, and I teach them to my students. I've helped students self-overcome. I take students, some who have never gone to college, or parents never gone, they're first-time college students, get into Harvard and things like that. What it takes is a lot of these mental techniques that we can apply and use. What I am doing in this book that I'm doing now is I'm doing a chapter, I call it Life Hacks, from the history of philosophy and religion, and basically giving examples historically and also from my life and from students' lives that I've known and people that I've known, and basically teaching people how to do these things for themselves so they can become the people that they want to become. They can direct their lives and things like that. They can be as happy as they could possibly be. They don't have to be stuck in this idea that, this mental idea maybe they inherited from their parents that they weren't good enough or something like that. They are. So it's basically like a philosophical self-help book something that I've
Amazing.
never written before, but I feel the need to write it, so I'm writing it.
Tell me about some of those life hacks that you learned. For example, what life hacks do we get from Nietzsche?
Oh, from Nietzsche. Oh, he's great with life hacks.
I know.
So Nietzsche, you know, the thing about him is that people haven't read him super carefully, I feel. And this is, I've taken from him things that probably most people would never have paid attention to. One of the things that he talks about is the person who has overcome, like that super person, the Übermensch, okay? That person creates their space, their physical space. Mm-hmm. And they, you know, so, okay, I was in a very bad place in my life at one point, okay? I mean, terrible. And I looked around my room and my house, and I said, this looks like a dump. You know, no wonder why I feel really bad about myself. So I slowly made it incredibly beautiful, exactly how I wanted it, exactly how I envisioned a person of success to live. Okay. And I made my space that way. And you can see this in traditions like feng shui, you know, that what you see around you basically reflects yourself back to you. So if you're surrounded by, you know, that's why my brother is or he's retired now, but he was a head of the sheriff's department. And so he was involved with people who he would call it the cycle of poverty. They would go to prison, and then their children would go to prison, then our grandchildren would go to prison. And I thought to myself, why? You know, why is there a cycle of this? And so we can break these cycles. So we can break them by changing this first hack that I learned from Nietzsche was basically changing your physical environment. And you just start off small with your bedroom. You change your bedroom first because, you know, say you really want a successful life. Well, you're going to put some very expensive furniture in your bedroom. All right. So and look for it, get the best deal. I'm not saying, you know, break the bank. Just put it in there. And you'll wake up and that's the first thing you see. It's luxurious, right?
Absolutely. Oh my God. I love this. I absolutely love this. It just goes to show how Nietzschean I am, because I'm going to send you a video. I have a video on LinkedIn where I talk about building your space for working from home.
Oh,
and
wow.
Honestly, and I bought this flat during the lockdown. I designed and built everything, like, you know, my furniture, everything. I built, like, I got drills, you know, I taught myself.
Wow.
Drilled, like, honestly, like I just put together everything, even my wardrobe. So the only thing I've had help with was there was like some of the panels of my wardrobe that I couldn't. It was too big and heavy for me. I had somebody to help me put the panels in place, but then I made all the drawers myself. I designed it the way that I always imagined, you know, like I liked a pale pink and blue, you know, that type of, you know, colors.
Beautiful. I love those.
And then my best friend, who I haven't, you know, over the past 15 years, I've only seen her once for like 3 days. So she's still in Iran, but she sent me a picture of a note that I had written when I was like, I think 19 or something. And in it, I described the way that I will design my flat.
Wow.
And it was like, it gave me goosebumps. I was like, you know, she was like, you literally, like, she was like, your house, your flat that you just bought and built, put together, is exactly how you told me that you wanted it to look like.
That is amazing. That's beautiful. I love that.
That's a life hack.
I love that story. Yes, I love that because it's absolutely the case. So you did that. That's what I hope people will take away from the book that I'm writing now. I feel like I've done that for me too in my life, and I've seen other people do it. And I've learned from people. One of the people in American Cosmic is Tyler, and he's a multimillionaire from doing exactly these kinds of things. And he came from a family who's the first person to go to college in his family.
Me too. I was.
And he went to, I won't say where he went to because he's is a pseudonym, Tyler, not his real name. But he was a C student who barely made it out. And then when he got out, he's worked for our space program. And then he had he couldn't even get a job in the space program. So he wanted to work at NASA. And what he did was he became a janitor. And now he's a top researcher in our space program, in the US space program. And so he told me his life story, and I couldn't believe how much it conformed to all of these life hacks. And so each person in my book that you'll read about or listen about are millionaires and some billionaires who've used these techniques. And so I kept mental notes, and even people who are successful and aren't millionaires or billionaires, but just did it themselves and did it in ways that were not conventional. They didn't inherit money, or they weren't particularly gifted in any way, created an amazing life for themselves by using these techniques. So I decided at some point, I need to write this down because I'm telling it to my students all the time. They're doing amazingly well. I need to leverage this information. So how do you do that? You write a book, you put up a website, and you get the information out. So that's what I intend to do.
Amazing. And I'm gonna make sure that by the time you finish that, I'm sure our community will be a lot bigger. I've started putting out an email to find out who wants to invest in female entrepreneurs, because I'm building an investment network of people who want to back female entrepreneurs. And like within a few days, I'm like, I can't even, I just thought, let me do an experiment, see if people will respond. I think we already got about 60 responses.
Wow.
And it's like, oh my God, like it's amazing that like when you have the intention to do something and then you actually put in the hours and do the work, and every morning you wake up and you keep holding that image, My hope is like by the time I'm dying, I want to see women in the top tier, and even if it doesn't,
women.
Yes. And if it doesn't happen in my generation, I want to have built a platform that will be a stepping stone for other women to reach that. But I can't see a reason why it shouldn't happen in my generation, in my lifetime.
I think that's beautiful. Wonderful. I love that.
Thank you. It's been amazing talking to you.
You too. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Professor Diana Walsh Pasulka. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star review. You can also find the full video of these conversations on my YouTube channel. And connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or Clubhouse at Somi Arian. Finally, if you're not yet a member of FemPeak, head over to fempeak.ai and register to join a community that actively supports women.